Hello everyone, back tuning into today's second video. We've already done the 5th Summer 2018 Analogues update. That video is here on the homepage. Just scroll down the page a little bit and you'll find it above the snow desk. Later on today, that video will be placed on the summer updates and forecast page. There'll be a written report that goes with that as well. We're looking at blocked marches and narrowing the field down using colder than average March CET Central England temperatures and the summers that followed those blocked and quite cold marches. So have a look at that and see what you think. This is the GWV Sunday Round-Up, so it's going to be your usual eclectic musing video for your Sunday afternoon viewing pleasure. We're going to start off having a look at solar activity. We'll see what's happening in the ocean. So there's news on the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. We'll have a look at the AO, the LAO, and we'll also have a look at the weather for the next week to 10 days as well. So a lot to cram in for your Sunday roundup today. We're going to begin by having a look at solar activity. So this is the latest in terms of the solar disk on our solar disk today from solarham.net. We have got one small sunspot area just there. Otherwise, there's not much going on. Solar activity is again at very low levels and will remain at very low levels for the next 3 days if the forecast is correct from Solarham. There has been a little bit of speculation I've seen over the past few days that we might have reached solar minimum for solar cycle 24 already. We might be starting solar cycle 25. I don't want to say too much about that in this video. We are going to be doing the solar Sunday, the next solar Sunday, probably next month in May. It may have to be pushed back to the first Sunday of June. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get it in, but we're hoping to be able to bring you Solar Sunday in May. That's when it would normally be. We normally do it 3 times a year, February, May and August. It just depends whether we've got the time. So I'll have more about that in Solar Sunday when we do that, either in May or at the start of June. I think it is quite unlikely myself that we have already hit solar minimum. There tends to be quite an overlap between the end of one solar cycle and the start of another solar cycle. In fact, it can be quite difficult to pinpoint exactly when one solar cycle ends and another solar cycle begins. It will be very, very early this to be starting or ending solar cycle 24 and starting solar cycle 25. Anyway, we'll have more about that when we do Solar Sunday. Hopefully that'll be in May. It may be early in June, but we'll let you know closer to the time. This is the GWV Sunday Roundup Solar Activity Tracker. This is updated to today from our good friend James Ackroyd. James sent this through to me this morning, so thanks very much for updating the solar tracker to James. And we can see that we remain at a very low level of solar activity. So this is tracking every day's sunspot numbers going right way back to last year. We can go right way back to last spring, where we start just there, and each one of these orange spikes is an individual day's of sunspots. So in September, back at the start of September last year, we actually had quite a big ramp up in solar activity. That looks like it's going to be the final burst of major sunspot numbers that we had for this solar cycle. You never completely say that's what's going to happen, but I think that will be the last major burst of solar activity back in September last year. Then a crash took place through the autumn, and we went into the winter at a very low level of the solar activity down here, and if anything, we've just seen a further weakening of solar activity as we've gone into the spring. So this is kind of like the start of spring just here, the beginning of March is in that area. And you can see we are now at a really, really low level of solar activity. These orange spikes are still telling us that some days we are getting a few sunspots, a very low level of sunspots appearing. But generally now, the days where we don't have sunspots, where we have spotless condition on the sun, those days are becoming more frequent than the days where we actually have sunspots. And so the thick red and green lines, they're the trend lines. And you can see we are now trending at a very, very a minimal level of solar activity indeed. So we are almost at solar minimum, there's no doubt about that. It won't be long before we hit the true solar minimum. As I say, there is speculation that we might have already reached solar minimum and started solar cycle 25. I think that will be very, very early to do that, so I'm doubtful about that personally, but we will have more about it when we do Solar Sunday. But we can say we are at a really minimal level of solar activity now, and if we haven't reached solar minimum yet, it won't be too much longer. I would anticipate, on a normal solar cycle, I would anticipate it'll be around 6 months, 6 to 12 months when we'll hit true solar minimum and then begin solar cycle 25. So I would place it sometime sort of the end of this year into the early part of 2019 when we hit true solar minimum and begin solar cycle 25. We might have done it very early. This solar cycle has been a really strange solar cycle right away from the start. Way back in 2008 is when we began solar cycle 24. It has been one of the weakest solar cycles ever recorded. Certainly the weakest solar cycle for over a century, and it's just been a really odd solar cycle from start to finish. We had the double peak solar maximum, where the second peak was stronger than the first peak, which is very unusual as well. So it's possible it's done something really different and unusual again. Anyway, we will have more about it when we do Solar Sunday. Hopefully that will be next month, so watch out for that. Have a look at the oceans next. So this is how things were looking in terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies in the oceans across the Earth when we did the Sunday Roundup last week. So the three areas we're specifically interested in, we've got the Equatorial Pacific Ocean just here, the ENSO region, we've got the Northern Pacific up here, and then we've got the Atlantic Ocean over there. That's how things were looking last week. This is how things are looking now. So let's deal with the ENSO region first. We'll go back to last week and then go forwards to this week. And very little change, but we have seen probably a further slight weakening of the La Nina signal through this central part of the Equatorial Pacific just here. So we do still have some blue colours indicating colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies, which is the signature of La Nina, the cold event that we have through the winter. That is very quickly now starting to, that's very quickly fading away, and I think it won't be many more weeks before those blue colours completely go away. And then, of course, we've got to think about where we're going to go with ENSO through the summer. Will we stay at ENSO neutral? Will we go back to La Nina? We might do. Or will we actually swing into El Nino? We'll start to get things becoming a little bit clearer about that, I think, in the next few weeks. Up in the Northern Pacific Ocean, been very little change up there over the past week. So again, let's go back to last week and then go forward to this week. Very little change. We still have that quite cold area up in the northeastern part of the Pacific Ocean. Over in the Atlantic, it's quite a cold looking scene actually, particularly in the northern part of the Atlantic. So to the south of Greenland, we've got cold and average sea surface temperature anomalies there. Quite cool through the tropical Atlantic Ocean as well now. So that's going to be more important as we get through to the summer in terms of the hurricane season. But it's possible we'll have a slightly weaker hurricane season this year compared to what we had last year, although it is very early days on that. And then up in the sort of northeastern quadrant of the Atlantic Ocean, which kind of covers the UK, Ireland, Spain, Portugal. It remains cold with sea surface temperature anomalies there. That's all left over from the cold winter, of course, particularly notably cold through the North Sea. And all of that, again, we'll see cold average sea surface temperature anomalies through the Med as well, and around the Bay of Biscay. All of that's left over from what happened in the winter. Those are shallow waters. They are prone to dramatic sort of temperature changes. So all it would take is 2 or 3 weeks of really warm weather, and you'll see those blue colours very quickly beginning to warm up. But at the moment, the sea surface temperature anomalies are still quite cold in the shallow waters around sort of northern Western Europe and through the Mediterranean as well. This is quite interesting. This is the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Now, as ever with all of these indexes, so it's same with the NAO, it's the same with the QBO, same with the AO, and on we go with the indexes, the SOI. They are all just indexes that are reflecting a particular state. So they're not driving anything, they just tell you what in this particular case the sea surface temperature anomalies are doing in the Pacific. So the PDO is a Pacific Decadal Oscillation of temperature change within the northern Pacific Ocean. So when you have a positive PDO, let's go back to this chart. We have a positive PDO. This area here in the sort of northeastern part of the Pacific, of the northern Pacific Ocean, will tend to be quite warm. But when you have a negative PDO, a cold PDO, essentially, then you'll have kind of like that horseshoe shape of cold there through the northeastern part of the northern Pacific Ocean. So it's this sort of area here that will be cold when the PDO is negative and will be warm when the PDO is positive. Now, we've had a very, very long run of a positive PDO. So this is every month's PDO number going right way back to 1900. So you can see that, for instance, in the year of 1900, every month actually was positive. That was a warm PDO, yeah, except for that was just there, September, and again November came out a little bit negative. But most of the months through 1900 were positive. So overall, 1900 was a warm PDO year. Let's see if we can find a cold PDO year. We probably have to scroll down quite a bit. So let's go down to 1951, this year just here, where we have, I think, pretty much every month, except maybe 1 or 2, is coming out with a negative number. So, for example, in January 1951, the PDO is minus 1.54. In February 1951, the PDO is minus 1.06. And on we go through the year of 1951 with these negative numbers. There is a slightly positive number just there. But overall, 1951 is a negative PDO year, so it's a cold PDO year in essence. But PDO is kind of like we say it's a decadal oscillation, so it is changing from year to year, but it's also changing over much longer time scales as well, over sort of decadal time scales. So the warm and the cold PDOs, they tend to run, I think, in around 20 to 30 year blocks, roughly. So if we scroll down to the last few years, we've had a very, very long run of a warm PDO, actually a record-breaking run of a warm PDO. I saw this last night. It was flagged up in the comments at GWV by Sean, but it's actually research that's been done by Simon Lee. I'm going to show you a chart from Simon that he posted on Twitter yesterday in a moment that will show you the decadal changes of the PDO. This is actually from NOAA, this index that we're seeing here. So back in 2013, that was our last cold PDO year, where we have many of the months through 2013 coming out with negative PDO numbers. See all of those minus numbers except for that one just there. But then the last negative number was December 2013, which came out at minus 0.41. And then we go into 2014, where every month through that year was warm with the PDO. 2015, every month again through that year was warm with the PDO. 2016, of course, this is going around the period of that super El Nino in the Pacific Ocean, so that probably explains what's happening in 2015 2016 and the failure of the easterly QBO. Again, we have a completely warm year in 2016, no cold PDO months at all, and 2017, last year, comes out with positive PDO numbers as well. That continues into 2018 for January and for February, but there we are in March. We have our first cold PDO month in March 2018, the first cold PDO month that we've had since December 2013. So it's been a long time coming. This is a record-breaking run. The previous longest run of warm PDO months was, I think it's around 36 back in the early 1990s. So I've had an incredibly long run of warm PDO months through the last few years, right the way since the start of 2014 through to 2018. March 2018 gives us our first cold PDO month for around 60 months, I think, or it might be 50 months, but it certainly was an incredibly long run of warm PDO conditions. This is that chart I was just talking about. This is the monthly PDO index going back to January 1900 up to March 2018, created by Simon Lee. Simon is on Twitter, and his Twitter handle is at Simon Lee WX. So do give Simon a follow if you're on Twitter. So the red spikes here, these are the warm years of the PDO. The blue spikes here are the cold years of the PDO. You see how this is changing over multi-decadal periods. So we start at 1900 just there, and we go to around the middle of the 1940s just here. And at that point, we kind of alternate in warm and cold PDO years to some degree. I think this period is a rather colder period of the PDO, from kind of like the teens of the 1900s into the 1920s. But from around the middle of the 1920s through to the middle of the 1940s, we're generally in a warm PDO year. You see that within these prolonged sort of 20, 30 decadal periods, we do still get alterations. So, for example, in this warm PDO year that we have just here, from the mid-1920s to mid-1940s, we do get some cold PDO years appearing as well, or cold PDO months. But they're generally outnumbered by the warmer months with the PDO. Then we go into the middle of the 1940s through to the end of the 1970s, and we go through a cold period of the PDO. Again, we do have variations of that. So, for example, at the end of the 1950s, we go for a few months and years that are slightly warmer with the PDO. But again, the general period of the mid-1940s to the late part of the 1970s is a cold PDO period. It possibly explains why the 1960s was such a cold decade. The 1960s do stand out for the UK as being notably cold, both for the summers and the winters of the 1960s. Part of that, anyway, might be down to the cold PDO. And then again, at the end of the 1970s, we start to go back into the warm PDO, and that carries on through to around the year 2000, somewhere around there. So through the 1980s and 1990s, again, the 1990s is well remembered as being a really warm decade, has lots of hot summers. Most of the winters in the 1990s are mild as well. That coincides with the warm phase of the PDO, and then from around 2000 up to, let's say, 2013, we're generally in the cold phase of the PDO again. Yes, we do get some warmer months and years going on up here, but overall this looks like it's a colder period of the PDO from around the year 2000, maybe a little bit earlier, but from around 2000 going up to around 2013. And then this, just here, this these red spikes, that brings us up to where we have been from the first month of 2014, January 2014, right the way through to February 2018. Every single month in that period, coming out as a warm PDO month, which is again a historic record-breaking run of the warm phase of the PDO. But you can, it's actually very hard to make it out, but that little blue area just there, in fact, let's zoom you in so you can see this. You can see the cold PDO month that we have had for March. There it is. It's only ever so slightly cold in terms of the PDO negative, but you can just make it out. That little blue mark just there, that is the first cold PDO month that we've had since December 2013. Now it looks like we are probably in the warm phase of the PDO now. It looks like we probably began the warm phase of the PDO back in 2014, I would assume. So, but we do know that within these warm PDO periods, we do get months and years that deviate, for example, what we see just there. So we can expect some months and years to be cold with the PDO over the next sort of 10, 15 years. But overall, we are probably now back in the warm phase of the PDO. And then we get to around 2030, and I suppose we'll go back into the cold phase once more. So we'll keep you updated with what's happening with the PDO over the next few months and years, of course. It's one of the drivers that some forecasts do take very seriously for coinciding with either warmer or colder conditions. And a lot of our cold winters do seem to occur around cold PDO phases, actually. So anyway, we'll have more on that over the next few weeks and months. Right, Arctic Oscillation Observed Forecast chart next. A black line here tells us where we've been with the Arctic Oscillation. Red lines at the end where GFS Ensemble forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go. Again, just as with the PDO, this is another index that's merely reflective of state of the atmospheric setup. This time, instead of looking at the Pacific, which is where the PDO is looking at, this one is looking at the Arctic. So we can see that where we are right now with the Arctic Oscillation is in slightly positive territory. GFS Ensembles forecasting us generally to remain slightly positive with the Arctic Oscillation through into the end of April. That takes us to the end of April just there. We did go very negative with the AO back in March when we had that cold PDO month, our first cold PDO month for several years. We went negative with the AO, interestingly. That followed the southern stratospheric warming that occurred in February, of course. That tells us that we've got blocking. When the Arctic Oscillation goes negative like that, it tells us we've got blocking over the Arctic. We've lost a lot of that blocking now. We've unravelled the effects of the southern stratospheric warming, and so that is why the Arctic Oscillation is generally in weekly positive territory and forecast by GFS Ensembles to remain in weekly positive territory as well. NAO, very same idea. So again, we've got black line here telling us where we've been with North Atlantic Oscillation, red lines at the end where GFS Ensembles forecasting the North Atlantic Oscillation to go. Remember, again, this is just an index that's reflecting state of the atmosphere. It's not driving anything. So as with the AO, the NAO is also in weekly positive territory at the moment. We do get a little dip down into negative territory in the next few days, interestingly, but overall GFS Ensembles are forecasting the NAO to stay around neutral to weekly positive. So we've got both the indexes, the AO and the NAO, in neutral to weekly positive state if the GFS Ensembles are correct for the next couple of weeks. And so you'll expect a commencement of spring, and that's what we're going to have in the next week or so. We're going to lose the cold weather that we've had over the past few weeks. We're going to go into proper spring, even summer-like conditions actually in the next few in the next week or two. So let's look at the GFS Ensembles. Let's do some forecasting. The red line here tells where we've the red line here is a 30-year upper air temperature average. Look at Cardiff today. Someone's asked to have a look at Cardiff. So that's where we are right now in terms of the upper air temperatures. We're a little bit above average at the moment. Temperatures are going to be rocketing in the next few days, going way above the 30-year temperature average for upper air temperature average for Cardiff in the coming week. Going to go really warm indeed. I think going to be seeing temperatures at least into the mid-20s Celsius, and in the southeast we might even go sort of 26, 27 at the end of the week. That's around 80 Fahrenheit. Going to be bizarrely warm after all of the cold weather that we've had. Going into the extended range of the GFS normal, dates along the bottom of the graph, of course. In the extended range, we find that the ensemble members are cooling down to some degree, but generally actually still keeping things above average right the way through to the end of the month. So it does look like this is going to be a notably warm April now. It is shaping up to be a very mild, very warm month indeed. It won't be a record break. We won't beat 2007 or 2011, but it will be a substantially warmer than average month, I think, this April. In terms of precipitation, so plenty of dry weather coming up with this rise in the temperature through to the final week of April, probably going a little bit more unsettled. Then we have a look at the surface temperatures for Cardiff. So again, this is 20 degrees just here. That's 10 degrees down there. We're starting off with maxima somewhere around sort of 10 to 13 degrees, but those temperatures are really lifting up a lot later this week, going to or even above 20 degrees for Cardiff as we get through to the end of the week and into next weekend. And then we've got a slide down in the temperature taking place, going back closer to average, but still holding up really quite well, you would say. So as I say, this is shaping up to be quite a warm April indeed. Temperature anomalies are coming out like that, warmer than average for not just the UK and Ireland, but for virtually the whole of Europe as well in the weekend. It's going from the 15th 23rd of April. Huge change on what we had with these charts in March. Precipitation anomalies looking like that, more or less drier than average for most of the UK from the 15th to the 23rd of April, but it is a little bit more unsettled, a little bit wetter across Ireland and western parts of Scotland. Most of Europe coming out drier than average as well, so a dry and warm scene for the bulk of Europe in the week ahead. And then finally we'll finish off with the GFS and the ECM. So this is how the GFS is looking for Wednesday, when this ridge is developing across central parts of Europe. The low pressure is being blocked out to the northwest of the UK, and we start to pull up these warm southerly winds, and that's how things are looking by Thursday. That's a classic sort of summer chart occurring in the middle of spring. We've got a big ridge of high pressure across Central Europe, centred over Germany. Low pressure is out to west of Ireland. We're pulling up these warm, even you would say for the time of year, hot southerly to southeasterly winds, and that continues into Friday as well. Friday, but there's a little bit of troughiness close to the country, so maybe some thundery showers being sparked off at the end of the week. But overall, pressure is staying relatively high even into the weekend. So that's how things are looking in a week's time. For example, on Sunday, high pressure is still more or less in control of things. Yes, it will be turning a little bit cooler, I would have thought. But we're not talking about a dramatic switch to anything notably wet. There may be more aware thundery showers breaking out through the course of next weekend, and then on into the following week. This is Monday, 23rd of April. Just purely because the pressure is weakening. So as the pressure weakens, the atmosphere starts to wobble a little bit, particularly because we've got high temperatures and a fair amount of humidity. So the atmosphere does start to wobble more through next weekend and into the following week, probably breaking out with thundery showers. But nevertheless, even up to day 10, we're keeping relatively high-ish pressure to our south and east, although to the northwest it is starting to turn more unsettled. And then right at the end of April, we do go into a much more unsettled phase then, with low pressure coming back as we run up to the extended range of the GFS run. Actually, as far as we go with the GFS now, 384 hours away, is Tuesday the 1st of May, and we start May looking a good deal more unsettled and cooler as well. Finally, the ECMWF. So again, we've got that ridge building across southern and eastern parts of the UK on Wednesday. its centre is over Germany, and that starts to pull up these very warm southerly winds as we go through to the end of the week, keeping a lot of high pressure going up to the end of the week as well. That ridge remains with us as we go into next weekend, probably turning a bit cooler across Scotland, but for England and Wales, actually the heat could continue into the start of next weekend anyway. And then we go into the extended range with the ECM. This takes us to Monday the 23rd of April, when again you'll notice pressure is just lowering gradually, and we're starting to revert back to a cooler and more unsettled type situation. And that takes us up to day 10, Wednesday 25th of April, where we're back in a properly unsettled and relatively cool type pattern again. It is only April, so we're not going to be able to sustain the very warm to hot weather that we've got coming up later this week. We're not going to be able to sustain that for a prolonged period because it is still only the middle of spring. So switch back to cooler and more unsettled weather is to be expected. That's what the ECM, WF and the GFS are going for. ECM is probably a little bit too quick in doing that change. I would suspect it'll take a bit longer to go unsettled. But I would have thought by the end of April we probably are likely to be back into cooler and more unsettled weather. Right, 30 minutes Sunday Round-Up, so it's been an extended one today. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Let me know what you think via the comments, and just say that again the analogues update is here on the homepage, so have a look at that, and later on today that will be placed on the summer updates and forecast page with an extensive written report that goes with it as well. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.